The world watched in astonishment as a wave of diplomats rose from their seats, their faces etched with disapproval. It was September 27, 2024, and the setting was the United Nations General Assembly. The target of their silent protest, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. His words, meant to address the assembly, were swallowed by the sound of shuffling feet and murmurs of discontent. This unprecedented walkout was a stark message of condemnation against Israel's recent military actions in Gaza, Lebanon, and Yemen. The diplomats, representing a diverse array of nations, chose to make a powerful statement against the escalating violence and the human suffering it had unleashed. The walkout served as a visceral reminder of the deeply rooted tensions in the region and the global community's growing frustration with the seemingly intractable conflict. It laid bare the raw emotions surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the broader geopolitical struggles that continue to plague the Middle East. As Netanyahu continued his speech, his words rang hollow in the half-empty hall, a stark symbol of the international community's waning patience and the urgent need for a peaceful resolution. For weeks leading up to the dramatic walkout, the Middle East had been teetering on the brink of chaos. Israel, citing security concerns, had launched a series of airstrikes on targets in Gaza, Lebanon, and Yemen. Each strike brought with it a new wave of destruction and despair, further inflaming tensions in the already volatile region. In Gaza, a densely populated Palestinian territory under Israeli blockade, the strikes targeted buildings associated with Hamas, the militant group that governs the Strip. Israel claimed these buildings were being used for military purposes, but the strikes resulted in civilian casualties and widespread damage to civilian infrastructure. In Lebanon, Israel's airstrikes targeted positions associated with Hezbollah, a powerful Shia militant group and political party. Israel accused Hezbollah of stockpiling weapons and launching cross-border attacks, but the strikes once again resulted in civilian casualties and heightened fears of a wider conflict. Meanwhile, in Yemen, Israel was accused of carrying out airstrikes in support of the Saudi-led coalition fighting against the Houthi rebels. The strikes targeted infrastructure and military installations, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis in a country already ravaged by years of civil war. The human cost of Israel's military actions was staggering. In Gaza, hospitals overflowed with the injured and dying, their corridors echoing with the cries of grief and anguish. The airstrikes reduced homes to rubble, leaving families homeless and desperate. The death toll climbed with each passing day, a grim testament to the devastating impact of the conflict. Children, the most vulnerable victims of war, were left orphaned, traumatized, and robbed of their futures. In Lebanon, the strikes displaced thousands of people, forcing them to flee their homes in search of safety. Hospitals struggled to cope with the influx of casualties, their resources stretched thin by years of conflict and economic hardship. The strikes also damaged vital infrastructure, including power plants and water treatment facilities, further compounding the suffering of the Lebanese people. In Yemen, the airstrikes deepened the humanitarian catastrophe, pushing a nation already on the brink of famine further into despair. As the violence escalated, the international community watched with growing alarm. The United Nations Security Council convened emergency meetings, urging all parties to exercise restraint and seek a peaceful resolution to the conflict. World leaders issued statements condemning the violence and calling for an immediate ceasefire. Human rights organizations documented the mounting civilian casualties, their reports painting a harrowing picture of the human cost of the conflict. However, despite the international pressure, Israel pressed on with its military campaign. Netanyahu, facing mounting criticism at home and abroad, defended his government's actions, arguing that Israel had a right to defend itself against terrorism. He accused Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran of using civilians as human shields and vowed to continue the strikes until Israel's security concerns were addressed. The international community, caught between condemnation and the need to find a peaceful solution, seemed powerless to stop the cycle of violence.